I never expected my life to turn into a headline. And if it did, I certainly didn't expect that headline, but that's exactly what happened. All because of a gas station. All because of a man I trusted. Let me take you back to the very beginning, the moment the air turned cold even though it was a humid summer night, and I realized that love isn't always warm. Sometimes, it burns. My name is Lillian Kavanaugh. I used to be the kind of woman who believed in soft mornings, good coffee, and eye contact that said more than words ever could. I married young, by some standards, 27, to a man I believed had the kind of steady soul that wouldn't shake beneath the weight of real life. His name was Gregory Hale. He was older by 8 years, successful in the insurance game, and had that quiet, unassuming charm that fooled everyone, including me. I was working at a local publishing house back then, in a quiet corner of Connecticut, where the days rolled over like lazy clouds and everything smelled faintly of pine and printer ink. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I had friends who dropped by with too much gossip and not enough cake, and a garden I talked to when no one was watching. And for a time, I thought Gregory fit into that life like the final piece of a carefully considered puzzle. I didn't know yet that he was the storm that would unmake it all. It started small. They always say that, don't they? That evil doesn't arrive like thunder, but like a trickle in the ceiling. You don't notice it until your feet are wet. He'd forget our plans and claim he never agreed to them. He'd brush off my opinions with a polite smile and a condescending nod. When I got promoted to editorial director, he didn't congratulate me. He just said, well, don't let that go to your head. But love makes fools of the smart, and I'd always considered myself smarter than most. A degree in literature, honors, published essays. None of that saved me from believing that maybe, just maybe, he was right and I was too sensitive. It took 3 years before I found the receipts. Literal ones. From hotels I'd never been to, for dinners I never ate. One from a boutique lingerie store in Manhattan that I hadn't stepped foot in since my bridal shower. The confrontation didn't go how I imagined. There were no slammed doors. Just silence. A shrug. Then the words, people change, Lillian. Maybe you should too. And yet, I stayed. Don't ask me why. Maybe because I believed marriage meant something. Maybe because I was ashamed of being wrong. Maybe because I didn't want to start over at 30. Until the night he left me. We were on our way back from his colleague's birthday party, a boring dinner at a pretentious steakhouse downtown where I'd worn heels that bit my ankles and a dress I bought only because Gregory said it hid the weight I'd been carrying lately. It was 1:52 a.m. when he pulled into the gas station. I remember. Because the clock on the dash was the only light in the car. He got out to pump gas, then opened my door and said, why don't you go get us some water? His voice was unusually calm. I got out. Walked into the empty, humming store under flickering lights. The cashier was a kid, maybe 19, half asleep. And listening to something with a heavy bass in one earbud. I picked up 2 bottles. Walked back out. The car was gone, not broken into. Not stolen. Just, gone. At first, I thought maybe he'd pulled around the back. Or maybe he was playing some kind of cruel joke. I walked around the lot. Waited, texted, called. Nothing. Then, at 2:08 a.m., I got a message, you'll figure it out. You always do. No name. No explanation. Just that. I stared at it for a long time, like it might rearrange itself into something more human. But it didn't. It stayed what it was, cowardice dressed in digital ink. I stood there, clutching those water bottles, barefoot now because I'd taken off my heels inside, and the chill of the concrete bit into me. The gas station light buzzed. A truck rumbled past, and something inside me cracked, not broke. Cracked. That's different, because cracks let the light in. I walked back into the store and asked the cashier if I could use the phone. He looked at me like I was the ghost of someone who'd once had a plan. He handed it over anyway. I called one number, not the police. Not a friend. Not my sister. I called Daniel, the bodyguard. He answered on the second ring. Lillian? Just that. My name. Like it meant something again. I took a breath, then whispered. Can you get me? There was no pause. Stay put. 10 minutes. And that's when the real story began, because Daniel didn't come alone. He came with 3 black SUVs and enough muscle to escort a politician through a riot. Men in dark suits, moving like shadows. One of them handed me a jacket. Another opened a door. Daniel stepped out last, towering and calm, eyes scanning the perimeter like this was a battlefield. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He looked at me, really looked, and said, you're done crying over him. We move now. And I did. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The ride back wasn't quiet, but it wasn't loud either. It was the kind of silence that fills a room when everyone is holding their breath, waiting for someone to fall apart. But I didn't. Not then. Maybe I was still too numb. The SUV smelled faintly of leather and new car polish. Daniel sat beside me, close but not touching, his eyes forward and his jaw clenched tight. I could see the faint pulse in his temple, beating out a rhythm I wasn't ready to name. We sped down the highway. The flashing lights from the dashboard made the inside of the vehicle feel colder than it was, almost sterile. One of the men up front glanced back at me through the rearview mirror, but he didn't say anything. Daniel finally broke the silence. "We're taking you to the penthouse. Security's already there." I didn't argue. I didn't ask what penthouse or whose. I knew the one he meant. The one I'd spent a single weekend in, 2 years ago, when Gregory had insisted I needed a breather from our marriage, as if it was a faulty machine overheating. That weekend, Gregory had been out of the country. Daniel had been assigned to me then too. Back when he was just one of Hale Enterprises' contracted protectors. Not someone who mattered. At least, not to Gregory, but I remembered every detail of that weekend. The calm Daniel carried in his presence. The way he stood outside the door. All night without complaint. The morning coffee he brought with a quiet nod and a quick, unreadable look when I opened the door in pajamas. It was the only weekend I hadn't cried in months. Now, I sat beside him again, no longer the fragile wife sent away for a break. I was something else. Something scorched. We pulled into the underground garage. The SUV stopped before a private elevator. Daniel opened the door before I could reach for the handle. He always did that. Gentle. Almost annoyingly so, this way. I followed him, barefoot still, the cold concrete stinging my soles. The other men stayed back. We stepped into the elevator, and the doors closed with a soft hiss. "Luggage will be sent in the morning," Daniel said. "I don't care," I whispered. He looked at me, his eyes softening, and for the first time since I'd called him, he spoke with something close to warmth. "You should care, Lillian. Not about the stuff. But about yourself." I blinked, but the tears didn't come. Maybe I was empty. Or maybe I was just storing them for later. The elevator dinged. The doors opened onto a sprawling space of glass and steel. The city stretched out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, lights twinkling like scattered hope. The penthouse was modern, too clean, too cold. It wasn't a home. But it was safe. Bathrooms to the left. Bedrooms down the hall, Daniel said, his voice lower now. "Security will be on the top and bottom floors. No one gets in or out without clearance." I nodded. Walked past him. I in the bathroom, I stared at myself in the mirror. Mascara. Smudged. Eyes too wide. Lips dry and cracked. I looked like a woman who'd been left behind at a gas station. Because I had. I showered until my skin turned pink and the water lost its heat. I wrapped myself in a robe too large and walked to the bedroom. The sheets smelled like lavender and linen, freshly changed. It felt obscene to slide into something so clean when I felt so used. I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay there, blinking at the ceiling. I heard the faint hum of the city below, the occasional creak of the building. At some point, I heard footsteps. Then a knock. "Daniel, come in," I said. He stepped in, holding a tray. Tea, toast, and fruit. He set it down on the nightstand without meeting my eyes. "You need to eat," he said. "I'm not hungry." He nodded. "Eat anyway." I didn't. Not until he left. Then I picked up a piece of toast and forced it down. It tasted like cardboard. But it reminded me that I was still alive. Morning came too fast. The room turned amber with the light pouring through the blinds. I sat up slowly, my body sore like I'd been in a fight. Maybe I had. A silent one. Daniel returned with clothes. Tailored. New. My size. I stared at the outfit. "How did you know?" He shrugged. "I remember. I didn't ask from where. I didn't want to know what he noticed about me back then." I dressed. Slowly. Every movement felt like a decision. When I emerged, Daniel was waiting. "We need to talk," he said. I followed him to the living room, where the city sprawled behind him. He stood like a sentinel, hands in his pockets. "Gregory's already putting out a story," Daniel said. "He's saying you're unstable. That you had an episode. That he left you at the station for your own safety." I laughed. A dry, ugly sound. "Of course he is. We have proof. The receipts. Your texts. The timing. We can fight it." "I don't want to fight." He frowned. "Then what do you want?" I looked out the window. The city was alive. Moving. So unlike me. I want to become someone he wouldn't recognize. I want to win. Quietly. Daniel stared at me. Then nodded. "Then we begin today." And we did. We started with the lawyers. My own. Not his. Fierce, intelligent women who shook my hand like they'd been waiting for this war. We gathered documents, outlined assets, traced investments. Gregory hadn't just underestimated me, he'd also been sloppy. Then came the interviews. The ones I conducted in secret. The publishing world was small, but I had connections. One former editor I'd mentored now ran a digital media startup focused on empowering women. I pitched her an idea. Not a tell-all. A feature column. She loved it. You want to write anonymously? She asked. For now, I said. But not forever. Over the next few weeks, I wrote. I poured every emotion into those essays. The gas station. The lies. The slow erosion of identity inside a marriage that looked perfect from the outside, and people read them. Thousands. Then hundreds of thousands. Then one day, a comment caught my eye. Whoever you are, thank you. You helped me leave. I stared at it for a long time. Cried for the first time in days. Daniel walked in while I was still holding the tablet. He didn't ask. Just handed me a cup of tea and sat down beside me. I leaned into him. For the first time, I let someone hold me. Then, just as I began to believe I could rebuild from ashes, an envelope arrived. No stamp. No return address. Inside, a photo. Gregory. Standing in front of a judge. Smiling. The caption, settlement hearing scheduled. And he brought a new witness. I turned the photo over, written in sharp red ink. She's about to destroy you. I stared at the photograph until my fingers numbed from holding it. Gregory's face, so smug, so performative, smiled up at me like he'd already won. And beside him, standing just far enough to remain out of the judge's reach but close enough to signal alliance, was a woman I recognized instantly. Meredith Lang, his cousin. No, not just his cousin. His oldest confidant. The one he always insisted was more of a sister than anything. She had dined at our table. Held my hand at our wedding. Whispered comforting nothings into my ear during the worst days of my miscarriage. And now, she stood poised to become his witness. His weapon. I felt the betrayal not like a knife, but like a burn, slow, spreading, irreversible. I placed the photo down and inhaled deeply. The scent of bergamot from the tea Daniel brought earlier still lingered in the air, sharp and citrusy. I let it fill my lungs, as though it could cleanse the rot that memory had brought in, but rage doesn't cleanse. It ignites. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Thought you might want a heads up before the story breaks. Attached, a link to an upcoming article in one of the biggest online tabloids. The headline. Millionaire insurance mogul alleges emotional abuse by estranged wife. There it was. His opening strike. Daniel entered the room as I set the phone down. His eyes flicked from the envelope to me. I saw it. It starts now, I said, my voice more steady than I felt. He didn't say I told you so. He didn't try to placate me. That's why I trusted him. We anticipated this, he said, stepping closer. And we're ready. But I shook my head. No, Daniel. I was ready to survive. Now, I'm ready to bury him. He arched a brow. Not in judgment. In understanding. I picked up the envelope again. Flipped the photo over. The words on the back, she's about to destroy you, lingered like a bruise. But I traced them with my thumb and whispered, she won't. I will. The legal team regrouped the next day. I sat at the long oak table in a private conference room inside a discreet high-rise, surrounded by the women I'd hired. Sophia Delaney, a sharp-tongued trial attorney with a reputation for dismantling lies, and Jade Park, a forensic accountant with a face like a mathematician and eyes like a bloodhound. They want to paint you as emotionally unstable, Sophia said, tapping her long red nails against the tabletop. They're using a strategy called erasure. Strip you of your credibility first, then go after the assets. They're counting on the fact that you'll stay quiet to protect your dignity, Jade added. It's the classic social trap. So what do? Sophia leaned back. We attack their narrative. Not with emotion. With evidence. You have any diaries, audio, emails, voicemails, anything? I blinked. He texted me. After he left me. And I saved everything. Jade smiled slightly. Good. Then we pull records. Timeline. Subpoena the gas station camera footage, the store surveillance, his credit card activity that night. Let's stitch together the truth. I sat back, breath caught in my throat. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the architect of my own defense. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I stood on the penthouse balcony, watching the city buzz below. The chill wind tangled my hair. The kind of cold that reminded you what it meant to be alive. Daniel joined me, wordless at first. Just presence. Then he said, quietly, he underestimated you. Everyone did, I said. Not everyone. I turned toward him. Why did you answer my call that night? He didn't blink. Because you needed someone who wouldn't leave. A silence stretched between us. But not the empty kind. The kind that builds something. I wanted to reach for his hand. I didn't. Not yet. The war wasn't over. By the end of the week, Meredith Lang released a statement. A carefully worded piece about how she had seen patterns of volatility in my behavior. That Gregory had suffered quietly for years. Sophia read the article aloud in the conference room. Suffered quietly? The man left you at a gas station barefoot with no explanation. I sipped my coffee. He's playing the long game. He wants me to break down. Jade pulled up a file. We found something. Meredith's finances. She received 3 large transfers over the past 2 months. From an offshore account. Registered. To Hale Enterprises. He paid her, Sophia said, laughing bitterly. Of course. And she sold herself for what, 30 grand? 50. But yes. I looked down at the photo again. Her standing next to him. All that false righteousness. And I whispered, then let's show the world what loyalty bought her. Daniel drove me to my first public appearance since the story broke. A women's leadership gala. I wasn't on the official speakers list. But I had a seat at the front, next to an editor from Vogue who'd read my anonymous essays and reached out. The ballroom shimmered with gold light and soft music. Women moved like rivers, graceful and strong. When I entered, conversations dimmed. Eyes turned. Some whispered. Some smiled. I wore a simple black dress. No diamonds. No designer flair. Just quiet power. During dessert, the host mentioned a surprise guest. Invited me to speak. I stood. Walked to the stage. My heels tapped out a rhythm on the wood. My palms didn't shake and I told my story, not all of it. But enough. Enough to make them understand. I didn't name Gregory. I didn't need to. I named the feeling, the pattern, the pain, and then I named the turning point. There was a night, I said, when I stood barefoot on cold concrete, holding 2 bottles of water and realizing the man I trusted most had abandoned me. That night, I stopped waiting to be rescued. I called someone who didn't flinch at my fear. And I began again. The room was silent. Then thunderous. I stepped off the stage, heart hammering, and Daniel met me with a look I couldn't name yet. Something between pride and worry. Later, we watched the video go viral. By morning, I wasn't anonymous anymore, and by nightfall, I received another envelope. Inside, a photo of Daniel, standing beside me on the balcony, scrawled in red ink, "You trust too easily." I stared at the photo, then turned to Daniel, who had just walked in. "We need to talk. Now." Daniel didn't flinch when I held up the photo. He stared at it, his own image captured from that night on the balcony, standing beside me like a guardian, and then looked straight at me, calm and unreadable. "You trust too easily," I repeated. The red-inked warning scrawled across the back. He didn't move. Didn't try to touch me or talk me down. And that restraint alone kept me from unraveling. "Where was this taken? How?" I asked. "I'll find out," he replied. "But it wasn't me. You expect me to just take your word for it?" "No. I expect you to ask every question you need to. Because that's what you do when you're rebuilding. You test the walls." I stood there, chest tight with confusion. Not just about Daniel, but about how many shadows were following me. It hadn't even occurred to me that someone had been watching from the very beginning. That maybe this was more than just a divorce. Maybe it was a dismantling. He finally stepped forward. "Let me show you something." We walked down the hall to the control room of the penthouse, an old security monitoring room Gregory once had installed for peace of mind, which felt ironic now. Daniel keyed in a password and brought up a log of activity. This, he pointed, was a breach. 2 nights ago. Someone accessed the private surveillance servers remotely. Briefly. Probably long enough to pull that image. "Can you trace it?" "Already. Trying." I exhaled. Slowly. "They're trying to make me paranoid. Or trying to make you burn every bridge so you're alone." And that hit harder than anything, because Gregory had always known how to isolate. How to plant ideas in silence. By morning, the viral video of my gala speech had taken over social media. Not just trending. Dominating. Celebrities reposted it. Women stitched their own stories to mine. Editors called for full features. Networks wanted interviews, but I stayed silent. Deliberate silence. Instead, I met with Sophia and Jade again. The court date was nearing, and we were deep into discovery. "We got a leak," Jade said, sliding a folder across the table. "Anonymous email. Documents. Bank transfers. And this." I opened the folder. Inside, a signed affidavit from one of Gregory's former employees, stating that Meredith Lang was involved in manipulating internal audits within Hale Enterprises. Not just taking money. Covering for Gregory's diversions. "Why now?" I asked. Sophia shrugged. "People jump ship when the water gets too high." Jade smirked. "Especially when they believe the ship is headed toward fire." "We can use this," Sophia said. "Get ahead of his witness strategy. We counterfile a motion to investigate the witness's credibility." "She's not just a liar," I said, staring down at Meredith's signature. "She's complicit." Sophia leaned forward. "Are you ready to go scorched earth?" I nodded, but then the threats began. It started with a voicemail. A man's voice. Masked by a voice changer. Stop the campaign. Or someone gets hurt. I played it on speaker while Daniel stood behind me, arms crossed. He's getting desperate, I said. No, Daniel replied. He's trying to act like he's still in control. He's not. Do we go to the police? They'll investigate, but not fast enough. So Daniel increased security. More cameras. Armed patrols. Motion detection software. Linked to the penthouse servers. I still didn't sleep, not because I feared Gregory, but because I feared what I'd find out about the man I married. How deep his manipulation ran. 2 days later, the court session began. It wasn't for the divorce. It was a preliminary hearing to determine spousal financial responsibilities. Gregory arrived in a navy suit. Polished. Unbothered. A mask I'd watched him put on for years. I wore a tailored gray pantsuit. No jewelry. Hair tied back. We didn't speak. Not with words. But when our eyes met, I knew he saw it. I wasn't the woman he left at the gas station anymore. Sophia handled the arguments masterfully. Presented documentation. Timelines. The abandonment. Text. His financial inconsistencies. Meredith's shady transfers. Gregory's lawyer tried to counter with emotional claims. She suffered emotional instability. Was prone to unpredictable behavior. Gregory feared for his safety. That was when I stood. Your Honor, may I respond? The judge nodded. I walked to the front. Looked him in the eye. My instability was grief, I said. It came after a miscarriage he told me to get over. It came after a betrayal I uncovered on my own. I wasn't unstable. I was surviving. And when he left me at a gas station with no wallet and no shoes, he wasn't fearing for his safety. He was fearing I'd finally stop making excuses for him. Silence, then the judge spoke. Temporary spousal support granted to the plaintiff. Defendant's claims are noted but unsubstantiated. Full trial will proceed. We left the courtroom. Gregory avoided my eyes, but I didn't avoid his, and when I passed him, I said it clearly enough for him to hear, "You're not the man I feared anymore." That night, the tabloids changed their tune. Instead of calling me unstable, they called me poised. Powerful. The woman who stood up to a ghost of a marriage. But my celebration didn't last long. At 11:27 p.m., my phone rang. Daniel's voice was cold. We found the source of the surveillance photo. I held my breath. It came from a private investigator. One hired by someone who paid in cash. But we traced the secondary account they used to order the job. Who? He hesitated. Your sister. And the room tilted, because I hadn't spoken to Margaret in nearly a year, because I'd trusted her, because she knew where I was that night on the balcony. You sure? Yes. Her signature on the lease. She rented the PI a temporary workspace under a false name. But it's her. I sat down, hand over my mouth. Why would she do this? You said it yourself. Gregory isolates. Maybe he didn't just target you. Maybe he got to her, too. I stared at the floor, heart pounding. Then I need to see her. Alone. Margaret lived in a quiet suburb outside Stamford. Her house was the same one our parents had left her when they passed. Neat garden. Wind chimes. Lavender growing under the kitchen window. It looked exactly the same as it did when we were kids. But that day, it felt foreign. Like walking into a place where your memories don't quite fit anymore. I parked at the curb. Alone, as promised. No Daniel. No cameras. I needed this conversation to be unfiltered, raw, and away from the eyes that had been watching me for weeks. The front door opened before I even knocked. Margaret stood in the doorway in a beige sweater and jeans, barefoot, her hair tied back like she'd been cleaning or maybe just pacing. She didn't look surprised to see me. Just tired. Come in, she said softly. I stepped inside. The scent of cinnamon tea filled the hallway. Pictures of our childhood still lined the mantel, dusty now. I paused at one, the two of us sitting on the porch steps with ice cream cones, our knees scraped and smiling like we didn't know what heartbreak was. You know why I'm here, I said. She nodded. Walked to the kitchen and poured 2 cups of tea like we were still sisters sharing secrets, not standing on opposite sides of a betrayal. We sat at the dining table. The same table where we played cards as girls and passed notes about boys we liked. And now, it was the battlefield. You hired someone to watch me. Margaret didn't flinch. Didn't deny it. Yes. Why? She looked down at her tea. Gregory came to me months ago. Said you were unraveling. That he was scared. Said you were planning to ruin him and drag the family name down with you. The family name? Margaret, you married a truck driver who left you for a blackjack table. We don't have a family name. Her lips pressed tight. He offered to help with the mortgage. With Jamie's tuition. Said he'd take care of everything if I just kept an eye on things. So you sold me out? I didn't know what to believe. You stopped calling. You were disappearing for days. Posting cryptic essays online. I thought maybe he was right. You thought I was losing it. I thought maybe you already had. The silence between us wasn't quiet. It buzzed. I stood. Walked to the window. Watched the wind rustle the leaves. My voice came low. You could have asked me. You could have come to the penthouse, looked me in the eye, and asked. I didn't know if I could believe you. That hurt more than anything. You chose him. I chose survival, she said, her voice cracking. Do you think it's easy raising a kid alone, working 2 jobs, watching the bills pile up while your sister becomes some magazine cover story for empowerment? I didn't choose him because I believed him. I chose him because he paid. I turned. Slowly. Looked her straight in the eye. I would have helped you. Without strings. Without betrayal. Without spying. Her hands trembled around the mug. I know. I didn't realize what I was doing until it was too late. And then I saw you on that balcony with Daniel and I knew you were going to be okay. You had someone. I didn't. Tears slipped from her eyes. I was ashamed. I wanted to scream. To cry. But mostly, I just felt empty. The investigator, I said. Who else did he report to? Just Gregory. That's all I know. I swear. I believed her, but I also knew something was still off. The photos. The timing. The threats. You have to testify. Margaret froze. You have to submit a written statement. Say exactly what you just told me. You were paid. You were manipulated. And now, you're coming clean. She nodded slowly. Okay. You owe me that much. Back at the penthouse, Daniel waited at the door. His eyes scanned my face like he was preparing for another disaster. She admitted it. Gregory paid her. She says that's all she knows. Do you believe her? I believe she's scared. And I believe she regrets it. But I also believe she's not the mastermind. Then who is? I looked past him, at the skyline beyond the glass. I think Gregory has someone else. Someone more dangerous. Someone who knows how to play long games. Daniel exhaled. We'll find them. But the search would take longer than we thought. A week later, we were served. Gregory had filed an emergency motion for full asset control. Claimed I was a flight risk. That I was hiding money. That I was using my public persona to influence the court of public opinion. It was laughable. But dangerous. Because all it took was one judge in a bad mood. Sophia nearly tore the documents in half. He wants to freeze your accounts. Strip you of access. Lock you out of everything. And he has Meredith writing new statements claiming she saw you stash documents and destroy files. We need a counter-move. We have one, Jade said, sliding over a flash drive. We found something on Meredith. Property records. A condo in the Bahamas. Bought in cash. From Gregory? No. From an LLC tied to a man named Emery Calder. Former financial advisor to Hale Enterprises. Fired 4 years ago. Disappeared. Until now. He's the one behind the shell accounts. Possibly. But we need more. The night before the emergency hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the balcony again. Alone this time, and then the buzzer rang. Daniel appeared within seconds. It's your sister. Margaret. I rushed to the door. She was shaking. Pale. Holding a folder. They came to my house, she whispered. 2 men. Said if I testified, they'd make sure I lost Jamie. Said they had photos. Daniel stepped in. Did you see their faces? No. But they gave me this. She handed over the folder. Inside, photographs of Margaret at a casino. Drinking. Losing money. Passed out. From months ago. It's real, she whispered. I was a mess. But I got clean. I swear. I pulled her into a hug. We'll protect you. You just have to be brave. She nodded against my shoulder. Morning came. We arrived at court. Margaret in a dark blazer. Daniel at my side. Sophia entered with fire in her eyes. We're going to win today. But you need to hold your ground. He'll look for cracks. Gregory arrived with Meredith and 2 new lawyers. He smiled at me. I didn't smile back. The judge entered. The hearing began, and Margaret took the stand. Halfway through her statement, she started to cry. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. She explained everything. The money. The PI. The threats. The courtroom was silent. Then Gregory stood. Against protocol. Spoke directly to the judge. She's lying. She's trying to save herself. But the judge shut him down. You will not speak until called. And just like that, momentum shifted. By noon, the judge denied Gregory's motion. All accounts remained accessible. No freezes. No restrictions. Outside the courtroom, he passed me. You think you've won something? Not yet, I said, but I will, because now I knew what he feared most. A woman who wouldn't break. The courthouse steps felt like a battlefield as I descended them. Paparazzi flashes burst through the gray afternoon like lightning, and questions rained down faster than I could blink. Is it true Gregory threatened your sister? Do you plan on pressing criminal charges? What's next for the woman who stood up and didn't blink? Daniel stepped between me and the swarm, ushering me toward the black SUV waiting at the curb. I said nothing. Not because I didn't have answers, but because every word I spoke now was a bullet. And I was aiming with care. Margaret sat beside me in the car, pale and shaky but resolute. She hadn't said a word since the judge denied Gregory's motion, and I didn't push her. The damage was real. But her courage was louder. Back at the penthouse, the sky opened up. Rain streaked the windows, distant thunder cracking somewhere over the city. I wrapped my arms around myself as I stood in front of the glass, watching the skyline blur behind the downpour. Do you want to see something? Daniel asked from behind me. I turned slowly. He held out a flash drive. Jade found something, he said. About Emery Calder. We plugged it into the media center. Footage played. Surveillance clips. Emery in a cafe. Then in a government building. Then again at a private airstrip. He never disappeared, I whispered. No, Daniel confirmed. He relocated. And guess where? The video paused on an airport timestamp. Nice, France. Of course, I muttered. Gregory had once bought a property there. A business expense that never appeared on our shared tax records. He's the one funneling money. And he's likely behind the threats, Daniel said. We need to go there. Out of the country? Daniel nodded. This isn't just a divorce anymore, Liliane. It's an operation. And you're winning it. But if you want closure, if you want to hit back where it counts, you go to the source. I exhaled. Book the jet. We landed in Nice 2 days later. The air was different there, saltier, like the coast was trying to wash secrets into the sea. The villa Gregory had purchased sat high on a cliff, overlooking the Mediterranean. Gated, guarded, but not impenetrable. Daniel handled the logistics. I handled the courage. That evening, under the guise of a wine auction, we infiltrated a social event hosted by a local financier. According to Sophia's sources, Emery would be there. I wore a backless black dress and heels I hated. But I held my head high. Because walking into a room full of predators and smiling is an act of war. Daniel trailed behind me, a shadow with teeth. Every glance, every whisper, every pause in conversation, he tracked it all. Then, we saw him. Emery Calder. Thinner than I remembered from the company Christmas party years ago. Same wiry glasses. Same smug tilt to his chin. He didn't recognize me at first. But when our eyes met across the terrace, something shifted. I approached with the calm of a woman holding a detonator. Emery, I said. His smile twitched. Liliane. Didn't expect to see you here. You've been busy. He sipped his drink, eyes narrowing. I imagine you have questions. Just one, I said. How much did he pay you to destroy me? His jaw clenched. You shouldn't be here. Daniel appeared beside me. Emery paled. We just want the truth, I said. You can give it willingly. Or we can subpoena it through the French courts. Either way, the truth's coming out. He glanced around. Lowered his voice. I didn't want to hurt you. Gregory said it was just business. That you were unstable, and the company needed distance. He lied. And you let him. I needed the money, Emery hissed. I had debts. He offered an out. Daniel stepped closer. That out just made you complicit in fraud, harassment, and obstruction of justice. So again, your options are confession, or consequences. By the time we returned to the States, we had a signed statement. Bank records. Wire transfers. Enough to collapse Gregory's financial foundation. Sophia nearly cried when we handed her the drive. This, she said, is the kill shot. But even as the legal gears turned in our favor, I felt uneasy, the calm before a bigger storm, and it came 3 nights later. I was alone in the penthouse. Daniel had gone to meet Sophia. Margaret was home with Jamie. I sipped tea on the balcony, trying to believe in peace again. Then the glass shattered. A bullet. It missed me by inches, embedding in the wall beside the fireplace. Security alarms howled. Doors locked. Red lights blinked. Daniel arrived 7 minutes later. SWAT style. I stood in the center of the living room, barefoot, shaking, still holding my teacup. They tried to kill me, I whispered. Daniel didn't speak. He just pulled me into him and held me so tight it hurt. We're leaving, he said. Now. A safe house in upstate New York. Forests thick around us. Quiet enough that even a whisper felt loud. Daniel didn't leave my side, and that night, we finally let the silence break. I've loved you since the day I brought you that coffee at the cabin, he said, voice low. I know, I whispered, and you don't have to say anything back. I just need you to know it, in case. Don't, I said. Don't talk like that. He smiled. Then promise me something. Anything. When this ends, don't just survive. Live. Build. Laugh again. Write again. Trust again. I touched his cheek. I already started. 3 days later, we went back armed with everything. The media didn't know where I'd been. But when I reappeared, the world watched. In court, Sophia submitted everything. Emery's statement. The Bahamas property records. The PI's logs. The threats. The bullet. Gregory's legal team faltered. He sat, motionless. Jaw tight. Eyes hollow. When the judge reviewed the evidence, he spoke just once. To say I'm disappointed in what this case has revealed would be an understatement. Ms. Kavanaugh, you have the court's deepest sympathies. We will be launching a formal inquiry into Mr. Hale's actions and all affiliated associates. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just stood tall, because I had become what he never expected, unshakable, and this was only the beginning. The courthouse doors closed behind me with a weight that echoed through my bones. It wasn't the sound of an ending. It was the sound of something massive shifting, like a steel door unlocking after years of rust. I had stood in front of a judge, my truth laid bare, every piece of pain turned into documented fact. And Gregory had nothing left to hide behind, but as I stepped into the sun, blinking at the flashbulbs, I didn't feel triumph. Not yet. Because winning in court doesn't undo betrayal. It doesn't erase the years. It doesn't bring back the version of you that didn't yet know how to be suspicious of the people you once loved. Daniel was already waiting by the SUV. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just opened the door like always, his presence the answer to a question I hadn't spoken aloud. Will I ever feel safe again? Where to? He asked. I closed the door behind me. Someplace quiet. We drove for hours. No music. No destination. Just the blur of trees and telephone poles, as if motion alone could scrub away the residue of Gregory's chaos. Eventually, we stopped at a cliffside overlook miles north of the city. The ocean stretched below, endless and unbothered. I stepped out, wind slicing through my coat, and let the cold sting my skin. I feel like I should scream, I said. Daniel didn't reply. He just walked to the edge of the overlook and waited. So I did. I screamed. Loud, long, raw. Every betrayal. Every lie. Every time I questioned my worth because a man preferred my silence to my voice. The wind carried it all away. When I turned back, Daniel didn't say anything. Just walked over and held me. We didn't kiss. We didn't confess. We just stood there. Two people who had chosen not to be ruined by what was meant to destroy them. The next week, I filed a civil suit, not just against Gregory, but against Hale Enterprises, Meredith Lang, Emery Calder, and the offshore shell companies they used to funnel assets. The lawsuit was made public. Within 48 hours, the press exploded. Not scandal this time, exposure. Headlines shifted. I was no longer the abandoned wife. I became the whistleblower. The survivor who fought back. The woman who refused to be erased. But I didn't care about the attention. I cared about accountability. Margaret, for the first time, came to one of the hearings. Sat in the gallery beside Daniel, holding her son's hand. Her presence said what words couldn't. She was choosing a different future. In court, our lawyers presented years of transactions, false accounting, employee testimonies, and wire transfers. Buried under international aliases. And Gregory? He didn't show. His legal team claimed he was in recovery. Rumors spread that he'd checked into a facility overseas. Whether it was real or a tactic, I didn't care. Let him rot in a luxury rehab suite, because while he was hiding, I was reclaiming. After the hearing, I received a message from a journalist. A woman named Kyra who'd followed my case from the start. She requested an interview. A full sit-down. Exclusive. National coverage. Daniel was cautious. It'll put you front and center. The scrutiny might return. But I said yes because this time, I had control. The interview was taped in a studio with soft lighting and warm tea waiting off camera. Kyra was gentle, but direct. We talked about the gas station, the abandonment, the betrayal, the court, the violence, and then she asked, "What do you say to women watching this who are still afraid to leave?" I looked into the lens. Not at the camera, but through it. Into the homes of every woman who had ever second-guessed her fear. I say, leaving isn't always a single step. Sometimes it's 1,000 tiny ones. Sometimes it's sitting on the bathroom floor at midnight whispering, "I can't do this anymore." Sometimes it's making a secret plan. Sometimes it's just surviving until the next sunrise. But every step away from abuse is a revolution. And you don't need anyone's permission to start it. When the interview aired, it became the most shared video in the network's history. Messages poured in from strangers, friends, even people I thought I'd lost. I cried that night, not because I was sad, because I finally believed I was free. Daniel took me to the coast that weekend. No press. No lawyers. Just us. The beach house belonged to a friend of his, an ex-Marine who owed him a favor. The place was quiet, tucked between dunes and pine trees, with a fireplace that crackled even in June. One night, as the sun sank low, and the waves whispered secrets to the shore, Daniel made dinner. Grilled fish, corn on the cob, a bottle of red wine that didn't match the meal at all. We ate on the porch. I was barefoot, wearing one of his oversized sweatshirts. Afterward, he poured the last of the wine and said, "Can I ask something selfish?" I raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you need permission?" He smiled. "After all this, do you think you'll ever be ready for something real?" I didn't answer right away. The wind danced across my skin. I closed my eyes, then I said, "I'm not broken. Just scarred. And scars don't scare me anymore." His eyes locked on mine. "Then I'll wait," he whispered. "However long it takes." I reached for his hand. "Don't. I'm not making you wait. I'm just asking you to walk with me." He nodded. And in that moment, something new began back. In the city, news broke Gregory had fled. He violated court orders and crossed state lines using a private aircraft not registered under his name. The feds were involved now. A warrant was issued. He was officially a fugitive. Sophia called me that night. "The moment this turns criminal, you're out of his reach. Let the system eat him alive." But I wasn't satisfied, because even fugitives leave trails. And some ghosts don't rest until you bury them. So I made a decision. I would find him, not to hurt him. Not for vengeance, but to look him in the eye and remind him that I wasn't just the woman he left behind. I was the one who kept walking, and nothing, not shame, not silence, not even fear, was going to stop me now. It's strange how clarity arrives, not as a lightning bolt, not as an epiphany, but as a quiet hum underneath the noise. A thread you finally notice has been running through everything, pulling you forward. I woke up one morning in the beach house. Salt air curling through the open window, and I just knew, this wasn't over. Gregory wasn't just fleeing justice. He was planning something. Because men like him didn't run unless they had an endgame. By the time I got back to the city, the investigation had intensified. The FBI had officially listed Gregory as a person of interest in an interstate financial fraud case. A federal agent named Harper met with me privately. Tall, silver-haired, sharp as winter glass, we believe he has contacts in the private aviation world. Former clients. He's not just hiding, he's moving. Quietly, but with purpose. "Do you think he's coming back?" I asked. Harper studied me. "Eventually. Not to surrender, but to settle a score." I didn't flinch. "Let him come." Harper smiled without humor. "That's what I like about you, Miss Kavanaugh. You don't just survive. You aim." Meanwhile, the civil case against Hale Enterprises began cracking wider. Sophia's team uncovered that Meredith Lang had liquidated multiple holdings under an alias and wired large sums to an untraceable cryptocurrency account. "She's scrambling," Sophia said. "They're all trying to cover their exits." Emery Calder, after testifying under a limited immunity deal, vanished again, this time under FBI protection. He'd gone from hidden asset to critical witness. In public, people started calling what I did a movement. Hashtags. Protests. Even a documentary in development, but in private. I was preparing for something else entirely, because I had found something. It started with a voicemail. A number I didn't recognize. A voice that sounded filtered, but oddly familiar. "I know where he is. But it's not what you think." Then, silence. Daniel was already reviewing it when I walked into the room. He turned, grim. "It's him." "What?" "Gregory. He's baiting you." Saturday. "Why?" "To pull you out. You're safe here. The court's in your favor. Public sympathy. Legal momentum. He needs to change the board. Make you move." "What if I want to move?" I said. Daniel didn't blink. "Then I'm coming. With you." We tracked the call. Burner phone, pinged once from a small private airfield in Montana. It didn't make sense. Not for Gregory. Not until I remembered the cabin. He'd once bought a winter home out there. Said it was for peace and retreat, but he'd never used it. It had stayed buried in paperwork, quietly untouched for years. Until now. We arrived 2 days later. Snow blanketed the ground even in April, stubborn pockets of ice along the hills. The roads were narrow, the trees bare. It was beautiful, and terrifying. The cabin was real. Wood, stone, silence. No signs of life, but the driveway had tracks. Daniel moved first, clearing the path, weapon drawn. Inside, the place looked lived in. Food. Bedding. A fire recently out, and then, on the table, a letter. My name on the front. Handwritten. I opened it slowly. It read, "You turned everyone against me. But you forgot, I made you. Without me, you're just a woman with a pen and a story no one cared about. Remember that." Daniel read over my shoulder. "Coward," he muttered, but I didn't feel fear. I felt insulted, because even now, he didn't get it. I wasn't made by him. I had survived him. We returned to the hotel that night. Snow began to fall. I paced Daniel. Finally said, "What are you planning?" "I want to talk to him." He looked stunned. "Absolutely not. Not alone. Not without the feds. But I want to see his eyes when I tell him what's coming. I want him to hear it from me. That it's over. You already won." "No," I whispered. "I just survived. Now I finish it." Harper agreed. A controlled meeting. Monitored. Recorded. He'd contacted Gregory through a back channel, presented it as a negotiation. To everyone's surprise, Gregory agreed. We met in a neutral location. An abandoned lodge, surrounded by security. With agents stationed in every shadow. He walked in wearing a smug grin and a wool coat, as if he were arriving at a dinner party instead of an ambush. "Liliane," he said, with that voice I once called home. I didn't flinch. "Gregory." "Still beautiful," he said. "Still dramatic." "Still a criminal," I replied. His smile twitched. "You wanted this meeting." "Why?" I asked. "To remind you," he said. "You can win the court. You can win the crowd. But you can't erase me. I'm part of you." I walked up to him. "Close enough that our history felt like heat." "You are a footnote in my story," I said. "And after today, you'll be the warning label I put on everything I build." "Big words," he said, "backed by federal charges." I shot back. He laughed. "You always did know how to make an exit." I stepped back. Harper stepped in. "Mr. Hale. You're under arrest." The cuffs clicked like music. Gregory didn't resist. Just turned to me as they led him out. "This isn't over," he said, but it was, for me. It was finally, irrevocably over. That night, I didn't cry. I danced. In the middle of the hotel room. Barefoot, music blasting, Daniel watching me like I was made of starlight. "You're free," he said. "No," I laughed. "I'm just beginning." The next morning, I woke to sunlight pouring through the hotel window and the smell of coffee drifting in from the hallway. Daniel had already stepped out to get breakfast. I lay there a while, the silence wrapping around me like a new skin. There were no hearings to prepare for. No threats to anticipate. Gregory was in custody. I should have felt finished, but I didn't, because even after justice, there's healing. And that part isn't loud. It's quiet. Tedious. Unseen. I walked barefoot to the balcony, the mountain air crisp against my skin. Below, the town moved on without knowing what had unraveled just days before. People walked their dogs. Opened shops. Laughed over coffee. The world had kept spinning. So I had to learn how to stand still again. Daniel returned with a paper bag in one hand and a hopeful look in the other. "Croissants and quiet," he said. I smiled. "You always know exactly what I need." We sat on the floor together, legs tangled under the small table, eating and talking like we were two people learning how to be normal again. "I have a question," he said after a while. I raised an eyebrow. "What now?" I leaned back against the wall. "I don't know yet. I think I want to rebuild. But not from where I left off. From something new." He nodded. "You don't have to rush. Just promise me one thing." "What?" "That wherever you go, you don't go back to shrinking to fit someone else's comfort." I laughed softly. "That woman doesn't exist anymore." In the weeks that followed, things moved fast. Gregory's name hit every major news outlet. His charges ranged from financial fraud to obstruction to conspiracy. Meredith Lang was also indicted, and while she pleaded out to avoid prison, her reputation was in ashes. The company, Hale Enterprises, collapsed under investigation. Stakeholders fled. The board dissolved. And a judge ruled in my favor for full compensation, including punitive damages. For the first time in my adult life, I was wealthy, truly, undeniably wealthy, but it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like reclamation. I didn't buy cars or jewelry. I didn't fly off to the Maldives. I invested, not in stocks. In people. 3 months later, I opened the doors to the Kavanaugh Center, an institute dedicated to helping women leave toxic relationships, rebuild financial independence, and find safe housing. The opening ceremony was small. No media, just the people who mattered. Margaret was there, holding Jamie's hand. Sophia. Jade. Daniel. I stood in front of the center's steel and glass entrance, the sun catching the name engraved on the front. "This is where it begins again," I told the crowd. "Not just for me. For all of us." Inside, the walls were lined with books, desks, resources, a hotline room with counselors trained to listen without judgment, a legal wing with volunteers, and in the back, a small sanctuary with warm light and music and silence. A space for grief and rebirth. Afterward, I walked alone through the halls. I touched the walls like they were sacred, and I cried because I had made something that Gregory could never dismantle, because I had turned pain into structure, because I had arrived. The media tried to re-enter the story. I received offers for exclusive tell-alls, book deals, even a Netflix script. I declined them all, because my story didn't belong to the tabloids anymore. It belonged to every woman walking through the center's doors. One evening, months later, I sat on the rooftop of the center, watching the sun fall behind the city skyline. Daniel joined me. He'd become more than a bodyguard, more than a friend, but we still hadn't labeled anything. He handed me a file. Something came in today. I opened it. Inside, a letter. From Gregory. Mailed through a prison correspondence system. I read it once, then again. He was sorry. Or at least, he wanted to be seen as sorry. It was handwritten, long, filled with reflections and excuses masked as epiphanies. At the bottom, I hope one day you can forgive me. I set the letter down. Exhaled. Are you going to respond? Daniel asked. No, I said. Because forgiveness doesn't mean reopening the door. It just means I'm no longer carrying the weight of locking it. He nodded. I leaned into him. The silence between us was warm, not empty. Later that night, I returned home, not the penthouse. I'd left that behind. Now, I lived in a restored brownstone tucked between trees, with a garden out back and windows that let in morning light. I made tea, read, slept. I woke to birdsong, and for the first time in years, I didn't wake with dread. I just woke alive, free, ready. I didn't know how healing would look until I saw it in the mirror. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with fireworks or sweeping music. It came in the form of breath, of stillness, of being able to look myself in the eye without flinching. The bruises Gregory left weren't on my skin, they were in the way I used to question my voice, my worth, my right to want more. Now, those bruises had faded, and in their place, something tougher, softer, stronger. I had survived the man who swore I couldn't, but more than that, I had become the woman he never believed I could be. I spent my mornings walking the neighborhood. A ritual. One cup of coffee in hand, one foot in front of the other. Sometimes Margaret would join me, Jamie bouncing beside her on a scooter. He was taller now. Curious. And full of questions I didn't mind answering. Aunt Lil, were you scared when Uncle Gregory left you? I stopped walking. I crouched down to his level. Yes. I was very scared. He looked surprised. But you're not scared now. No, I smiled. Now, I'm just careful. And it struck me then, how children don't need you to be invincible. They just need you to be honest. Margaret squeezed my hand as we continued walking. We didn't need to say much anymore. Our bond was stitched back together by small things, shared meals, quiet apologies, memories unspoken but understood. She'd gotten a new job, administrative work at a nearby university, and she was finally breathing without fear of her past knocking on the door. At the Kavanaugh Center, things were growing. We'd opened a second location in Detroit and had 3 more in development. I watched women walk through our doors every day with their heads lowered, and walk out weeks later with steel in their spines. We hired therapists, legal aides, survivors turned advocates. One of our new counselors was a woman who had once written to me anonymously after watching my interview. Now, she was helping others do the same. Daniel helped run security. He'd built a whole system around discretion, protective identity programs, off-grid safe houses, confidential case files. The kind of infrastructure I didn't even know survivors needed until I met the ones who were being hunted. One afternoon, as I walked into the center's library wing, I saw Daniel crouched beside a young girl. Her mother was in a counseling session. He was showing her how to fold paper cranes. He looked up at me and smiled. And I felt something in my chest settle. That evening, we had dinner together. Candlelight. Pasta. Wine. The house was quiet except for Miles Davis playing low in the background. He watched me over the rim of his glass. You've changed. Is that good or bad? Neither. Just true. You hold your ground differently now. There's no tremble. I used to think trembling was weakness. He leaned in. It's not. It's the sound of a bridge right before it carries something heavy. I stared at him. Do you ever regret not stopping me? From what? From going after Gregory. From finishing it my way. No, he said. Because watching you walk through fire showed me what survival really looks like. And I would never rob you of that. He took my hand. Do you want to build something with me? He asked. Not just moments. Something bigger. I paused, not because I was unsure, but because, for once, I wanted to savor the decision. Yes, I said. But it has to be honest. No pedestal. No saving. Just side by side. He lifted my hand to his lips. Side by side is all I've ever wanted. We didn't get engaged. Not right away. There was no rush. Instead, we traveled. Trains. Roads. Silence. Stories. We visited a shelter in New Orleans where a woman I'd helped anonymously years ago now ran programs for teen girls. We stood at a women's march in Washington. Hands raised, our photos ending up in international headlines. We danced under stars in Santa Fe, and when we came home, I began writing again, not about Gregory, about women, their fire, their grief, their rebuild. The essays became chapters. The chapters became a book, and when it launched, I held a copy in my hands, the title embossed in silver, Unmade, then Unbreakable. It hit #1 within a week, but more than the sales, it was the messages that wrecked me. Letters, DMs, women whispering through paragraphs, this saved me. One note stood out. A teenage girl from Idaho, I was going to leave this world. Then I read yours. Now, I'm writing mine. Gregory tried to reach me one more time. A third-party letter. Filtered through legal channels. He wanted a visit. One conversation. Closure. I said no, because some endings don't need revisiting, some doors stay shut for a reason. 1 year to the day after the gas station, I returned there, same place. Same time, but this time, I wasn't broken. I walked through the aisles. Bought 2 bottles of water, and I waited outside. Then, I took off my shoes, felt the cold concrete beneath my feet, and I smiled, because I remembered that girl. Barefoot. Betrayed. Alone, but I also remembered what came next. I stepped into Daniel's car. He looked at me. Ready? Yes, I said. Where to? Anywhere, I smiled. I've already arrived. The sky was pale that morning. One of those soft, overcast days where the world feels quieter, as if it's holding its breath for something beautiful or devastating. I sat at the window of a small cafe in Boston, the Wren House, a spot Daniel and I had discovered on a road trip 6 months earlier. We were here again now, not for press or business or even rest. We were here to make decisions. I got the call, I said, stirring my coffee with more care than needed. Daniel looked up. From the foundation? I nodded. They want me to sit on the board. Full time. That would mean relocating. New York again. Permanent office. His eyes searched mine, but there was no fear. No tension. Do you want that? I sat back. Thought carefully. I think I want to help on a larger scale. We've built something real, Daniel. Something I didn't think I could ever be part of. But I don't want to become a figurehead. I want to stay grounded. Close to the women. Close to the stories. He smiled. Then let's split our time. We don't have to pick one place. You've always been good at making homes out of movement. Home. That word didn't sting anymore. It didn't remind me of cold walls or lies folded neatly in the closet. It reminded me of warmth, and rebuilt trust, and the quiet way Daniel always made space for my voice. Later that week, I returned to the center alone. There was a girl waiting at the front desk. 19, maybe 20. Her hands were shaking. She was me, in so many ways. I sat with her in the garden behind the building, where we'd planted lavender and rosemary. She didn't say much. Just held the tea I gave her like it might break. I saw you on the screen once, she whispered. You looked so sure. I smiled softly. That was the 5th take. She blinked. You weren't? I was terrified. But I also knew that if I didn't speak, someone else would suffer in silence. She nodded, tears in her lashes. I haven't told anyone, she said. Not even my mom. You don't have to tell the whole world, I said gently. You just have to tell the truth. Start there. She looked up. And after that? You rebuild. Bit by bit. You make your story louder than your scars. At home that night, I found Daniel in the garden, sleeves rolled, hands in the dirt. He was planting something, sunflowers. I later learned they turn to the light, he said. Even when it's cloudy. I knelt beside him, palms pressed into the soil. They remind me of you, he added quietly. I touched his shoulder. Then let's grow a whole field of them. Weeks passed. Seasons began to turn. And with them came a sense of peace I hadn't known in years, but peace didn't mean complacency. I traveled. I lectured. I met survivors in cities I'd never visited. Heard stories that mirrored mine and ones that shocked me into silence. In Chicago, I held the hand of a woman who fled a cult-like marriage with 4 children. In Phoenix, I sat in on a therapy circle where 10 women shared one story across 10 voices. In every room, I saw myself, and I spoke not as a savior, but as a survivor still learning. Then, one afternoon, I received a letter from the Department of Justice. The criminal case was closed. Gregory had taken a plea. He would serve 15 years, no chance of parole, and forfeit nearly all his assets. I didn't celebrate. I exhaled. Daniel poured 2 glasses of wine. We clinked glasses in the backyard, the sun low, the air golden. He's gone, I said. He was gone long before the cuffs, Daniel replied. This is just the echo. I looked at him. Do you ever think about how it all started? Every day. And do you ever wish it had been different? He didn't answer right away. Then, no. Because if it had been different, maybe we never would have found each other. I swallowed. Is that terrible? To admit that something good came from so much pain? He shook his head. It's not terrible. It's human. On the anniversary of the center's opening, we hosted a private dinner, candles, handwritten place cards. Survivors, staff, allies. No press. No spectacle. I stood to speak, not with a speech, but with a story. I was once left barefoot at a gas station, I said. But the real betrayal wasn't that he left. It was that I almost believed I deserved it. Almost. Until I didn't. And when I chose to believe I was worth more, everything changed. Chairs creaked. A few sniffles. Silence, thick with solidarity, and tonight, I continued, we don't just celebrate what we've built, we celebrate that moment. The moment we all decided to believe in our worth. Because that's when the story shifts. That night, after everyone had gone home, Daniel and I walked through the empty center, hand in hand. He stopped in the lobby, turned to face me. I bought land, he said. I blinked. What? Upstate. Woods. Lake. Quiet. For weekends. Maybe. Someday for more. I smiled. What's there now? Just trees. But I thought we could build something. My throat tightened. Like a cabin? He nodded. Or a sanctuary. Or a story. Whatever you want it to be. I leaned against him, forehead to his chest. You've always let me choose. You never needed my permission. That night, in bed, I wrote in my journal a sentence that had been echoing for months. I am not a victim. I am the author. And, for the first time since that night at the gas station, I didn't dream of being left behind. I dreamed of building something no one could ever take away. Fall arrived like a whisper, then a wave. The trees in the city shed their edges slowly, then all at once. The streets were littered with golden rust, and every morning smelled like cinnamon and firewood. I had always loved this time of year. But never like now. Now, it felt like mine. Daniel and I visited the land he'd bought. Just trees, as he'd said, but standing in that wide, open space where the wind moved without permission, I could already see what we'd build. A porch wrapped in sunlight. A fireplace made of stone. Rooms that didn't echo, but held warmth like a secret. He handed me a folded piece of paper, a sketch. He'd drawn it himself. You're sneaky, I murmured, eyes tracing the lines. Just prepared, he replied. Prepared for what? For a future that doesn't apologize for the past. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I wrapped my arms around him and let the silence fill the space between what we'd lost and what we were about to grow. Back at the center, expansion was underway. We'd partnered with local universities to offer scholarships to survivors. Margaret had taken over operations in our original location, and she was thriving. Jamie had just started middle school. He'd built a makeshift recording studio in their guest room, announcing one evening at dinner, I'm going to be a podcast host. I laughed, but I meant it when I said, then I'll be your first interview. The woman I once found trembling in our garden had now joined our advocacy board. She was speaking at conferences, mentoring others. I watched her with awe, not because of her strength, but because of her softness. The way she never had to raise her voice to be heard. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. I'm still here. One day, out of nowhere, I received a call from my former publishing house. The same one where I'd once climbed the editorial ladder while pretending my marriage wasn't falling apart in private. Lilliane. The voice said. We'd like to honor you at our fall gala. Lifetime achievement. For your work in literature and advocacy. I stood frozen in the kitchen. Are you sure you have the right number? I joked. The woman laughed. We're very sure. I told them I'd think about it. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because part of me wasn't ready to walk back into that world. The world that watched me smile while I unraveled. When I told Daniel, he didn't push. He just said, you don't owe them anything. But if you go, make sure it's for you. So I went. The night of the gala, I wore a deep green gown. No diamonds. Just a simple necklace, a tiny pendant Daniel had given me on our first real vacation. The card had said, for the woman who taught me how to stay. The hall was full of faces I hadn't seen in years. Some surprised. Some sheepish. Some pretending not to be impressed. When I took the stage, I spoke briefly. I used to think the most powerful stories came from polished places. Quiet, controlled, clean. But I know now the stories that last are the ones that survived chaos. And I'm not here tonight because I climbed a ladder. I'm here because I chose not to disappear. Silence. Then thunderous applause. Afterward, an old colleague approached me. Gray at the temples now. Once my mentor. You're not the same woman I knew, he said. I should hope not. He nodded slowly. You were good back then. But now you're undeniable. I didn't let the praise sink in too deep. I knew better than that now, but I accepted it, because part of growth is learning how to receive what you've earned. That winter, Daniel proposed, not with a grand gesture. No crowd. No hidden photographer, just the two of us, in the cabin still. Under construction, snow falling outside. He knelt on bare wood floors, ring in hand, heart in his eyes. I know we already built a life, he said. But I want to put my name beside yours in every way. I want to say yes to you, again and again, forever. I knelt with him. You already have me, I whispered. He slipped the ring on. Simple. Elegant, unbreakable. We married in spring. I in the woods. No church. No aisle, just friends, family, and vows spoken beneath a canopy of wildflowers. I wore a dress I found in a small vintage shop. Nothing designer. Nothing loud. Just lace that felt like memory and a veil stitched by Margaret. Daniel wore his father's cufflinks. Jamie carried the rings, and when we danced, it wasn't the first song that made me see our why. It was the silence between beats. The stillness I had never known inside someone else's arms. Afterward, we returned to the cabin, not as a hideout. As a home. That summer, I finished my second book. Not essays. A novel fiction, but full of truths too heavy to name. My editor said, "It's your best work yet." And maybe it was, because I wasn't writing from fear anymore. Or anger. I was writing from freedom, from the quiet, steady joy that comes when you've built something no one can burn down, when you've learned the sound of your own name and no longer wait for it to echo in someone else's approval. And maybe that's what healing really is, not the absence of pain, but the presence of power. Mine, ours, and the road ahead, still unfolding. We spent our first summer as husband and wife building shelves, literal ones. Floor to ceiling. In our cabin by the lake, books lined the walls, and not just mine. First editions Daniel collected. Poetry. War memoirs. Children's stories, he insisted. We'd one day read aloud to tiny humans we hadn't yet decided on. It wasn't about the stories themselves, it was the idea of legacy. Of passing something soft and real from hand to hand. One evening, while labeling a box of journals, I found one I hadn't seen in years. The leather was cracked, the spine loose. It was from the months right after Gregory left me at the gas station. I read 3 pages. That's all I could manage. It wasn't the pain that gutted me. It was the voice. The way I pleaded with myself. To stay quiet, to not fall apart too loudly. I think if I disappear a little more each day, maybe I'll become the kind of woman he wants. I closed the journal. Pressed it to my chest. Then walked outside and buried it beneath the sunflowers we'd planted together. It didn't belong on a shelf. It belonged in the dirt, where things go to become something else. Daniel held me that night like he always did. No questions. Just space. In the morning, I opened my eyes to the smell of coffee and the sight of a new journal on my nightstand. A note tucked inside, write forward. Not back. The next few months moved gently. We spent our days tending to the cabin, hosting survivors from the center who needed rest, and running weekend workshops. It wasn't advertised. No social media posts. Just word of mouth. Women came, tired and wide-eyed. Some brought children. Some came alone. Some brought nothing but silence, and we let them be. That was the secret. We didn't force the healing. We simply offered a place to rest between storms. Some stayed for days. Some, for weeks. One woman, Dana, arrived in the middle of a thunderstorm. Soaked. Shivering. She didn't speak for 2 days. When she finally did, it was to tell me about the man who'd told her she was nothing without him. That no one would believe her. I listened. Then I told her about the gas station. The silence. The cold floor beneath my bare feet. She cried so hard her shoulders shook, and when she left a month later, she left a letter behind. You reminded me that broken doesn't mean unworthy. It just means you've been brave more times than people can see. I pinned it to the wall of the library, beside dozens of others like it. Letters. Notes. Drawings from children. A collage of reclamation. Fall came again. The trees lit up like fire. I was standing on the porch, mug in hand, when Daniel walked out holding a folded piece of paper. He looked nervous. You okay? I asked. I think so, he said. But you might cry. I smiled. Try me. He handed me the paper. Inside, an offer letter, the Department of Justice. They wanted him. A high-level consultant role in a national task force on domestic violence prevention and survivor protection. It's everything you're good at, I said. It's everything you built, he said back. Do you want it? He paused. Only if you come with me. We relocated to Washington, D.C. that winter. The cabin remained ours, a place we returned to monthly. But the city became our new rhythm. I established a policy arm of the center there, started working with lawmakers and public educators. We held roundtables, drafted bills, pushed for better funding, safer shelters, more legal representation. It was exhausting, but it was worth it, because now we weren't just helping one woman at a time. We were reshaping the systems that failed them in the first place. Then came the day I got the call. Harper, the silver-haired federal agent who'd helped bring Gregory in. I thought you should know, he said. He's being transferred. Why? Health complications. Terminal diagnosis. Liver failure. He has less than a year. I didn't speak, he asked for a visitor. You, specifically. Daniel found me staring out the window later that night. I told him. He didn't react. Just waited. Are you going to go? He asked eventually. I don't know. You don't owe him anything. Closure doesn't need his face. I nodded. I know. But maybe I owe it to myself. I visited him 3 weeks later. The prison hospital was sterile, quiet. I walked through the halls like I was moving underwater when I stepped into the room. He looked smaller. Pale. Sunken. He tried to smile. You came. I didn't come for you, I said. I came for the girl you left behind. He blinked. I've had time to think. To regret. That doesn't erase anything. I know. I sat. Not close. Just enough. I'm not here to forgive, I said. I'm not here to make peace. I'm here to tell you that you failed. You didn't destroy me. You don't own a single part of what I've built. He closed his eyes. I didn't know how to be any other way. I know. And I no longer care. Silence. I thought you might want to say goodbye, he said. I did, I replied. To the version of me who needed your approval. She's gone. She's not coming back. I stood. He didn't ask me to stay. I walked out with my spine straight. And my breath steady, and when the guards shut the door behind me, I didn't flinch. I called Daniel from the parking lot. Done, he asked. Done. You okay? I think I'm finally more than okay. And I was, not because I'd gotten the last word, but because, for once, I didn't need it. The first snowfall of the season came the night after I walked out of Gregory's hospital room. Daniel and I sat on the balcony of our DC apartment, hot drinks in hand, watching the flakes settle over the city like a quiet benediction. The world was hushed, blanketed. Pure. I breathed it in like oxygen. What now? Daniel asked, his voice wrapped in warmth. I smiled, tugging the blanket tighter around my shoulders. Now we live without looking over our shoulders. He reached for my hand. I like the sound of that. I did too, but living without fear isn't something you switch on. It's something you practice. Day by day. Breath by breath. And some days, it came easy. Others, it came like a war. I returned to work at the center with a new fire. The DC branch had doubled in size since our arrival. We were lobbying hard for national legislation, mandatory trauma-informed training for law enforcement, a standardized survivor support protocol, and increased funding for legal aid in rural counties. I sat in rooms with men in suits who spoke in dollars and stats, and I looked them in the eye and said, these are not numbers. These are women with handprints on their skin, stories in their throats, and children learning the sound of silence before they learn their ABCs. And finally, they started listening. It wasn't victory. But it was movement. Daniel was traveling. More now. Meetings. Field assessments. High-level consultations. One night, over dinner, he said, they want me to lead the initiative. I didn't blink. You should. It'll mean more time away. We built this to grow. Not to cling. He smiled. Still the fiercest woman I know. Good. Keep it that way. We developed a rhythm. Long stretches apart followed by weekends that felt like exhale. Every time he walked back through the door, I felt it in my bones. This is my person. Not because he completed me, but because he never asked me to be less. We didn't talk about children much. Not because we didn't care. But because we both knew love didn't need a traditional shape to be full, but life has a funny way of showing up when you least expect it. It happened one rainy Thursday. I was preparing for a conference speech when a call came through the center hotline. One of our partner shelters had a situation. A woman had left in the night, leaving behind a child. No name. Just a note, I can't protect her anymore. Please help. I drove there myself. When I arrived, the girl was asleep in a small cot. 5 years old. Curled into herself like a question mark. Her name was Ava, and the moment she opened her eyes, something cracked open in me. Not pity. Not duty recognition. She reminded me of myself at that age. Not in appearance, but in posture. In the way her eyes scanned the room, always looking for exits. The shelter director said, she hasn't spoken yet. So I sat with her. Every day. Sometimes reading. Sometimes just breathing in rhythm with her. After a week, she reached for my hand. After 2, she spoke. Are you going to leave me too? I didn't cry. I just said, never. Daniel came home that weekend. I told him everything. He sat quietly, taking it in. Then said, bring her home. I blinked. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. And just like that, we became a family. It wasn't easy. Ava had nightmares. Attachment issues. She didn't like doors being closed or hands being raised, even to wave. But slowly, she learned us. And we learned her. We painted her room together, lavender and sky blue. Daniel built her a bookshelf. I filled it with stories of brave girls and soft endings. One night, as I tucked her in, she whispered, do I have to go back? I kissed. Her forehead. This is your home now. Forever. She nodded. Okay. Then I'm going to call you Mom. My heart cracked open like morning light. We began the adoption process. Slow. Careful. But we moved forward. Margaret visited with Jamie, who took to Ava like a big brother without being asked. He taught her card tricks. She gave him friendship bracelets. We spent holidays together, laughing around fires, baking more cookies than any human should consume. Life became layered. Not perfect, but rich. And one day, Ava came home from school with a picture. A house. A tall woman. A man with stubble. A little girl with curly hair, and a heart drawn over the whole thing. She handed it to me and said, "That's us." I hugged her tight, because it was the night our adoption was finalized. We didn't have a party. We just sat in the backyard, watching fireflies. Daniel held Ava on his shoulders. She pointed at the stars. "Which one's ours?" she asked. "All of them," I whispered. "Every single one." Ava's laughter became the new rhythm of our home. It echoed through the hallway at dawn, when she tried to sneak into our bed. It spilled out in the kitchen when Daniel burnt pancakes on purpose just to hear her giggle. It wrapped itself around our evenings, curled like a blanket around the softest parts of us. I never knew how much sound I'd silenced in my life until hers filled it. Some nights, I'd wake and just watch her sleep, the slow rise and fall of her chest, a reminder that healing wasn't a concept, it was alive and breathing in the room across from mine. At the center, we created a new program, Little Roots. A space for children recovering from the echoes of violence. Art therapy. Nature. Walks. Safe touch education. One little boy, no older than 6, built a tower out of blocks one day and said, "This is where I put the bad days, so they don't fall on me anymore." That tower stayed on display for weeks. It reminded everyone what resilience looked like. When you hadn't learned shame yet. We brought Ava sometimes. She made friends. Taught them her made-up games. Showed them how to build block towers, too. I watched her lead. I watched her listen. And I realized she was becoming the kind of girl who wouldn't just survive, she would thrive. One morning, as I was folding laundry, Daniel called from the porch. "Lil," he said, "you should see this." I walked out and found him holding a newspaper. He handed it to me, folded neatly to a single headline: "Former mogul Gregory Hale dies in federal medical facility." I stared at it for a long time. My breath didn't catch. My heart didn't race. It just settled inside. Ava was humming to herself. Daniel stood quietly beside me. "You okay?" he asked. I folded the paper. "I'm okay," I said. "Because this doesn't change anything." And it didn't. Because I'd already buried him long before the earth did. I walked back inside, kissed Ava on the head, and helped her braid a ribbon into her hair. Life kept moving. The center hit 10 national branches. I was invited to speak at the United Nations. I wore a navy pantsuit and stood beneath flags from every continent, talking about dignity and policy and the difference between survival and sovereignty. Ava watched from the live stream at home. When I returned, she had made me a card. "You spoke for all the quiet people." I kept it in my wallet. Spring came. Our garden bloomed. Lavender, like always. Daniel built Ava a swing that hung from the oldest tree on our property. I watched them from the kitchen window, his hands guiding her gently into the air, her legs kicking skyward, her laughter louder than wind. One night, as we tucked her in, she asked, "Do people always stay gone when they die?" Daniel hesitated. I sat down beside her. "Not always," I said. "Sometimes they live in the things we build to keep them out. And sometimes, they're just gone. Because we've let go." She nodded. "Good. Because I don't want the bad ones to come back." "They won't," I promised. "They can't reach you here." Daniel and I started writing a book together, not a memoir. A guide. For men who wanted to be allies. For those who wanted to listen and didn't know how. For the fathers, the brothers, the friends who'd stood by confused and silent. It was called Before She Has to Ask. When we announced it, the backlash came fast, angry corners of the internet calling it propaganda, accusing us of rewriting masculinity, but we stood firm, because the ones who were ready showed up. One man wrote to Daniel, "This book made me realize my silence wasn't neutral. It was a choice." A year after Ava's adoption, we held a quiet celebration. Just us. Cupcakes. A walk by the lake. She wore a crown made of dandelions. At sunset, she stood in the middle of the dock and shouted into the sky, "I'm not afraid anymore." Daniel caught my eye. Smiled, and there was I. One morning in July, a package arrived at the center. No return address. Inside, a journal filled with poems, the name scrawled on the first page, Meredith Lang. I froze. For a second, everything tilted. I opened it. Each poem was dated. Written from prison. They weren't apologies. They were confessions about fear. About greed. About silence. One line stuck out: "I kept his secrets like inheritance. They poisoned everything I built." At the bottom of the final page, she'd written, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted someone to know I finally saw myself." I placed the journal on the center's wall of truth. Not as redemption, but as a reminder that some people don't escape their darkness. They just learned to name it. Daniel and I took Ava to Paris that fall. Her first time on a plane, she slept with her face against the window and woke up just as we descended into morning clouds. The city was golden stone and story. We walked hand in hand through Montmartre, ate pastries that left powdered sugar on our noses, and took photos beneath the Eiffel Tower. At the top, Ava looked out over the skyline and said, "I think I'm going to write a book someday too." I kissed her forehead. "You already are." Back home, I sat on our porch one night, alone, staring up at the stars. I thought about the gas station, the cold floor, the cracked voice, the betrayal, and then I thought about Ava's laughter, Daniel's steadiness, the center, the book, the garden, and I realized, I hadn't just healed. I had rewritten the ending, not with vengeance, but with vision, and love, and the wild, unwavering belief that I was always meant for more, and now, I was living it. The first time Ava called me Mom in public, it startled me, not because I didn't want it, but because it came so naturally from her lips, like it had always belonged to me. We were in a bookstore, her tiny fingers wrapped around a copy of a children's novel. She turned to me, held up the book, and said, "Can I get this, Mom?" I froze, smiled, nodded, and in that moment, I realized, motherhood wasn't something I inherited. It was something I chose. Something I kept choosing every single day. That fall, we started an initiative at the center that Ava had unknowingly inspired. A literacy program for children in shelters and transitional housing. For kids who needed more than just food and a bed, they needed imagination, stories, a sense that escape didn't always mean running away. We called it Chapter 1. Ava insisted on designing the first logo herself. A crayon drawing of an open book with stars pouring out of it. "You think it's too kiddie-ish?" she asked, squinting at her work. I smiled. "I think it's perfect." The program launched in 3 cities, then 5. Libraries donated books. Volunteers showed up in waves. I walked into reading rooms filled with small voices and wide eyes and thought, this is where revolution begins, with a page, with a name, with someone listening. Daniel took a sabbatical that year, not because he was tired, but because he wanted to teach. He joined a training institute for federal officers, building courses on trauma-informed response, advocacy collaboration, and how to dismantle power dynamics with empathy instead of ego. His class was full. Always. I watched him from the back row one day, hands in motion, voice steady, explaining that the strongest thing a man can do isn't protect, it's respect. One cadet raised a hand. "Sir, do you ever feel like you're fighting a losing battle?" Daniel didn't blink. "Only when I forget why I started." Later that evening, he told me, "They're listening. Slowly. But they're listening." I kissed his temple. "So? Keep speaking." Around the holidays, we hosted a small gathering at the cabin. Just close friends and colleagues from the center. Margaret and Jamie came. Jamie, now almost grown, had launched his podcast and was making waves with his bold takes and sharp wit. Ava adored him. He brought her a microphone of her own, painted gold. "So you can start your own show one day," he said. She hugged him so tight I thought she might never let go. I watched them, heartful. These weren't just people. They were my roots, and we had grown each other. At midnight, while the others shared stories by the fire, Daniel and I stood outside under the stars. He wrapped his arms around me. "Remember when we were afraid to build?" I nodded. Now I don't remember what it felt like not to. In the new year, I received an email from a university. They wanted to create an endowed lecture series in my name. A yearly event focused on survivor advocacy, policy reform, and the intersection of narrative and justice. I was stunned, not because it was unexpected, but because I'd once begged myself just to get through the next hour without crumbling. Now, my name was going to stand as a symbol of endurance. Daniel read the email over my shoulder. "You're leaving footprints." I turned to him. "We are." Later that week, Ava and I visited the center's new location in Baltimore. A renovated library turned into a haven. We walked through the halls, stopping to look at the murals painted by survivors. One wall was covered in affirmations. "I am not what they did to me, love doesn't hurt. My silence was survival, not weakness." Ava traced her finger along the words. Then she said, "Do you think my mom, the first one, ever thought I'd be okay?" My heart clenched. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I think if she could see you now, she'd know you are." She looked up. "Do you think she loved me?" I knelt in front of her. "I think she loved you the way she knew how. But love can't always stay. Sometimes, the bravest thing a mother can do is make sure her child finds a different kind." She nodded slowly, and for the first time, I saw her let go of the question. We returned home to find a letter waiting, from a woman I'd once helped anonymously, years ago, when she had fled in the middle of the night with only a phone number. And a borrowed coat. Inside the envelope was a photo of her. Her daughter. A graduation cap. A certificate. I made it, the letter read. Because you reminded me that staying quiet wasn't strength. And that speaking up didn't make me dangerous yet. Made me real. I pinned the photo beside Ava's drawing in the center, because these were the stories that mattered, not the ones on the news, but the ones that bloomed in the dark and reached toward the light. Daniel and I spent that spring writing again. We co-authored a second book, Building After Breaking. It was a collection of essays, interviews, and letters. From survivors. From advocates. From children. From men who had grown and unlearned and changed. We dedicated it to Ava. The girl who turned silence into melody. When it released, we didn't throw a launch party. We held a community circle. Survivors sat in a ring, reading their favorite passages aloud. There were no spotlights, just shared breath, and when Ava stood to read her favorite line, I almost wept. She looked around and said, "It's not about what happened to us. It's about what we do next." And maybe that's what I'd been learning all along, that trauma doesn't define you, choice does, love does, and the way you write the next page, because the world will try to define you by the things you survived, but your power is in deciding what comes after. And for me, for us, what came after was life. A wild, bright, open life, and we were living every line of it. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. It was thick, wrapped in parchment-like paper, sealed with wax, a ridiculous, old-fashioned touch that somehow made my hands tremble more as I opened it. Inside was a formal invitation. A gala. A reunion, actually. Gregory's extended family, the ones who used to raise their eyebrows at my wardrobe, who'd whisper behind crystal glasses when I brought fruit salad instead of filet. They were hosting an event in New York. An anniversary for Hale Internationals. Founding. I stared at the embossed lettering. Underneath the invitation was a note. "We understand things ended poorly with Gregory. But you were once part of this family. We hope you'll come." It wasn't signed. I showed it to Daniel. His eyes scanned the page, jaw tight. "Why now?" I shrugged. "Legacy. Image. Who knows?" Ava, from across the room, looked up. "Are we going?" I hadn't decided. I didn't know them anything, but I remembered the way they'd looked at me the last time, like I was furniture that didn't match the decor. I remembered how they'd whispered words like failure, burden, and divorced, as if they were curses instead of circumstances, and I remembered standing in a gas station parking lot barefoot, the world spinning, the realization that not one of them would call to ask if I was okay. "I think we are," I said finally. "I think it's time." The night of the event, I wore a dress that shimmered in soft navy, off the shoulder, fitted but not flashy. My hair was pulled back in a loose bun, a single gold pin holding it in place. Ava's birthday gift. Daniel wore black. Always elegant. Always quiet strength. Ava wore white, a satin bow in her curls. She looked like she'd walked off the page of a fairy tale. We arrived fashionably late. By design, the ballroom was lavish. Gold trim, velvet curtains, chandeliers. Like constellations. Waiters moved like ghosts with trays of champagne. I saw them before they saw me. Gregory's aunt, the one who once called my work cute. Gregory's cousin with the nervous laugh and wandering hands. Gregory's sister, Miranda, standing near the piano with a flute of something expensive. Their gazes landed on me one by one. And I watched their smiles falter. Daniel stood tall beside me. Ava slipped her hand into mine. We walked in together. A ripple of whispers followed us. "Lilliane," Miranda said finally, approaching with practiced elegance. "We weren't sure you'd come." I smiled. "And yet, you invited me." Her eyes flicked to Daniel. Then to Ava. "And you brought guests." "They're not guests," I said. "They're my family." Something tightened in her jaw. "It's just tradition, you know. These things are usually more reserved." "For ghosts?" I said sweetly. "Because that's what your brother became the night he left me at a gas station." The silence was sharp. "I see," she said, her voice brittle. "Well, enjoy the evening." "We will." We made our way to the back terrace. Away from the chandeliers. Closer to the sky. Daniel poured us each a glass of sparkling water. Ava munched on a pastry. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Better. Then okay. I'm here. On my terms." Ava looked up. "They were staring a lot." "Because they don't understand," I said. "People often fear what doesn't fit the version of the world they've created." She thought for a moment. "Do we scare them?" I smiled. "A little." She grinned. "Cool." Later that evening, someone tapped my shoulder. It was Gregory's father. Gray. Thin. Eyes softer than I remembered. "Lilliane," he said. "You look, well." "I am." I wanted to say, I was wrong. "About you. About how I treated you." I stared at him. "I'm sorry," he added. I nodded slowly. "Thank you. That matters more than you know." He looked at Ava. "She's lovely. She's everything," I said. We left shortly after. No grand goodbyes. No applause. Just a quiet exit under a sky full of stars. The driver opened the car door. Ava slid in. Daniel followed. I turned one last time to look at the glittering building, not with bitterness, not with longing, just clarity, and then the roar came, the sound cut through the night. A sleek, jet-black aircraft hovered above the lawn, elegant and silent. My name, painted discreetly on the side. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You planned this? I grinned. A little dramatic? He shook his head. No. Just perfect. The jet door opened. We boarded, the city lights falling away beneath us. I sat back, holding Ava's hand, and in the reflection of the cabin window, I didn't see the girl who once begged to be loved. I saw a woman who had risen and taken everyone who mattered with her. The jet sliced through the night like a secret whispered across stars. The city shrank beneath us, its skyscrapers turning to stitches of light, its noise vanishing into clouds. I watched Ava press her forehead against the window, her breath fogging the glass. She whispered, "We're really flying, huh?" I smiled. We are. Daniel leaned back in his seat, legs crossed, eyes locked on me. You sure you don't want to tell me what happens next? You'll see, I said, eyes glinting, because this wasn't just a flight, this was a reckoning. A return. A start. We landed in Maine, just past midnight. A car waited, sleek and silent, its headlights slicing the fog. Our driver nodded, opened the door. Ava yawned and curled against me as the car glided down winding roads, past woods and water, until the sky cracked open to reveal a house, not a mansion, not a cabin, but our house, the one we'd built, glass, wood, open space. Designed with care. Intentional. No locked rooms. No dark corners, only light. We stepped inside, silence greeting us like an old friend. I carried Ava to her room, kissed her cheek, pulled the blanket up to her chin. She murmured something in her sleep. Something like, safe. And that's when it hit me, how far we'd come. The next morning, I woke early. The smell of sea salt and pine drifted through the window. I padded barefoot into the kitchen. Daniel was already there, coffee in hand. He leaned against the counter, watching me. So, he said. We made it. We did. What now? I looked past him, toward the rising sun. Now we do something terrifying. He smiled. Which is, we rest. Because for years, my body had been in motion, fighting, proving, surviving, but now, rest felt like rebellion. Like bravery. Of course, rest didn't mean silence, not for long. By week's end, we received a call from a publisher. They wanted to turn our advocacy story into a docuseries. Film crews. Interviews. Real survivors telling real stories. I hesitated. Do you think we're ready? I asked Daniel. He nodded. It's not about us. It's about them. Always was. So. We said yes, and soon, our house turned into a temporary studio, cameras in corners. Lights overhead. People everywhere, but the stories, they filled the walls like breath. One woman spoke of hiding in a laundry room with her baby. Another described escaping across state lines with nothing but a passport and $28. A teenage boy shared his experience of being silenced by his school after coming forward, every word sacred, every voice honored. Ava watched from the side sometimes. Quiet. Absorbing. After one shoot, she came to me. Do you think people will believe them? I knelt beside her. I think people already do. They just needed someone to start the conversation. One afternoon, while the crew packed up, a producer approached me. Would you consider narrating the opening? She asked. I paused. My voice. On camera, not in writing. Not behind glass. Me, I will, I said, and I did. In a single take, because I knew every word. They weren't written on a page. They were carved into me. The show premiered 6 months later. The night it aired, we invited close friends to our home. Jamie brought popcorn. Margaret cried 3 minutes in. The screen glowed with stories, with truth, and when the credits rolled, the room was silent. A quiet sacred enough to feel holy. Then Ava clapped, and we all followed. The docuseries sparked something bigger than we expected. Fundraisers. Petitions. Policy discussions. One congresswoman cited it during a debate on domestic violence legislation. Change doesn't start in chambers, she said. It starts with stories. And that's when I knew we'd done something irreversible. We'd shifted the axis. Weeks passed, then months. Ava entered middle school with a backpack twice her size and a heart 3 times braver than mine was at her age. She joined the writing club, wrote a short story about a phoenix who burned every time someone doubted her, and kept rising anyway. She titled it, Her Fire. When I read it, I wept, not for the pain, but for the resilience. That winter, Daniel and I received an invitation to speak at an international summit. I stood on a stage in Berlin, surrounded by strangers, and told my story, not the polished one. The real one. The gas station, the cracked silence, the night I chose not to be small, and when I finished, A man in the front row stood up, then another and another, until the entire hall rose in unison. Not applause. Acknowledgement. It wasn't about me. It was about everyone who had survived in the dark and never stopped walking back home. I tucked Ava in one night after a bad dream. Mom, she whispered. What if the monsters come back? I held her close. They won't, I said. And if they try, they'll find we built armor out of love. She smiled against my shoulder. Cool. And she slept, and I stayed a while, listening to her breath, knowing I'd never take this quiet for granted. Not again, because we weren't just a family. We were a movement, and we weren't done yet. The morning I was nominated for the Humanitarian Honor Circle, I was barefoot in the garden, hands deep in soil. Daniel ran out holding his phone. You should probably see this. I wiped my hands on my jeans and took it. The screen showed my name in bold print, next to words like legacy, courage, and global impact. My first thought was of the gas station. My second thought was of Ava, asleep upstairs, unaware her mother had just been called a symbol of change. I didn't plan for this, I murmured. Daniel grinned. No one plans for becoming a lighthouse. But here you are. The ceremony would be in Geneva. 3 weeks away. International press. High-profile speakers. And a hall of faces that had shifted the world in their own ways. I nearly said no, but Ava was the one who stopped me. Mom, you always tell people to stand up when they're scared. Maybe this is your moment. In the days leading up to the trip, I couldn't stop thinking about the years I'd spent shrinking, how much of my life had been consumed with proving I wasn't fragile. As if survival was something you had to perform to earn respect, but standing at the edge of a global platform, I realized something deeper. I wasn't just healed. I had become the architect of a new kind of strength. Geneva was cold that week, but the streets pulsed with energy. We arrived a day early to settle in. Ava loved the cobblestone alleys and painted storefronts. Daniel held my hand tighter than usual. He knew this wasn't about the award. It was about standing in my own name, and I was ready. The day of the ceremony, I wore a midnight blue gown. Simple. Elegant. The same pin Ava gave me glittered in my hair. As I stood backstage, I thought of every version of me that had once been scared, silenced, and small. I thought of every woman still fighting to be believed, and then I walked onto the stage. The lights were blinding. The applause, deafening, but when I stepped to the podium and the crowd settled, I began, not with rehearsed lines, with truth. There was a night, years ago, when I stood alone in a gas station, barefoot, betrayed, and terrified. That night, I believed my story was over. That I would forever be defined by the man who left me behind. But I was wrong. I paused. That night was my beginning. Not because I rose immediately, but because I realized no one else was coming to save me. I had to save myself. I spoke of rebuilding. Of the center. Of Ava. Of Daniel. Of the communities we reached. The children we lifted. We are not survivors because we escaped pain, I said. We are survivors because we dared to live despite it. When I finished, the room stood, not in celebration, but in recognition. Of every silent scream. Every unspoken truth. Every buried scar. That night, back at the hotel, Ava curled against me in bed. You were the strongest one in that whole room, she whispered. I kissed her forehead. I was strong because you were watching. The next morning, I woke to a flood of messages. Point 1 from a woman in South Africa. I watched your speech with my daughter. She's 10. She cried. Then she stood up and said, I want to be brave like her. One from a man in London. I never knew how complicit I'd been in silence until I heard your words. I promise to listen differently now. And one, unsigned, from someone who simply wrote, you helped me choose life. Thank you. When we returned home, the house felt different, not because it had changed, but because I had. Ava's school invited me to speak at a parent assembly the following week. I almost laughed. From Geneva to gym bleachers, but I said yes, because every room matters. I stood on that tiny stage, heart pounding, and I told those parents that our job isn't to shield our children from pain, it's to teach them how to walk through it without losing who they are. Afterward, a mother approached me, tears in her eyes. A bruise just barely hidden by makeup. Your words, she whispered. They gave me permission. I didn't ask for what. I just hugged her, because I knew spring melted into summer. Ava published her first short story in the school paper. The Girl Who Breathed Fire. It ended with a line that made me cry in the pantry so she wouldn't see. Her fire didn't scare her anymore. It reminded her she was alive. Daniel and I sat on the porch one evening, wine in hand. The stars blinked above us, the air warm and full of crickets. He looked over. Do you ever wonder what your life would have looked like if Gregory never left you there? I thought about it, then shook my head. No. Because then I wouldn't have this life. And this one, it's mine. Fully. He nodded. It's a hell of a life. We clinked glasses, and I knew we were nearing the end of this chapter, but the story, it was far from over. Autumn came early that year. The leaves turned gold before September ended, and the air tasted like change. Ava had just started her second year of middle school. Taller now. More curious. Still asking 1,000 questions, most of which I couldn't answer without thinking first. She was becoming herself in bright, bold pieces. One evening, after dinner, she asked, "Do you think people get the endings they deserve?" I looked at her for a long time before answering. "No," I said. "But I think we get the endings we write for ourselves when we stop waiting on someone else to write them for us." She smiled and went back to her sketchpad, but that question stayed with me. In late October, the center held its biggest event to date. 10 cities joined in simultaneously. Workshops, panels, readings, survivor circles. I was asked to speak last. I stood before a sea of faces in Chicago. Each person a story. A world, and I spoke not of trauma, or pain, or injustice, but of choice. I don't believe healing is a destination, I said. It's a decision we make again and again. To stay. To try. To reach. Even when our hands shake. When I finished, a group of young girls approached me. One had a cast on her arm. Another wore a sweatshirt 2 sizes too big. They didn't speak right away. Then the one with the cast said, "We didn't think we mattered until we heard your story." I hugged them all, because I knew Daniel and I celebrated our 6th anniversary quietly. A dinner at home. A dance in the kitchen. Ava pretending not to see us sway while she read in the corner. Later that night, as we lay in bed, Daniel whispered, "You ever miss your old life?" I turned to him. "I miss who I thought I had to be. But I love who I became instead." He kissed my temple. "Me too." Ava's first public exhibit launched in December. Her art teacher had nominated her for a youth showcase at the City Gallery. She'd painted a series called Becoming. It was raw. Brave. Beautiful. One canvas showed a broken cage with light pouring out, another, a girl standing in rain, growing flowers from her feet. The final one stopped me cold. It was a woman, tall, fierce, wings stitched from torn pages. Eyes closed, but face serene. At the bottom, Ava had written, "She didn't need to be rescued. She just needed to remember." I didn't cry in public, but that night, I made an exception. The documentary received a major award in January. I flew to Los Angeles for the ceremony but almost didn't go on stage, until I remembered, this wasn't about me. So I stepped up, trophy in hand, and said, to every survivor who was told they were too much, too broken, or too loud, "Your story matters. And we're just getting started." The standing ovation wasn't for me. It was for us. Back home, the snow came thick and early. Ava insisted we build a snow phoenix instead of a snowman because snowmen melt, she said. Phoenixes rise. I helped sculpt the wings. Daniel took pictures. We drank cocoa with extra marshmallows and made a list of things we wanted to do that year: hike the Appalachian Trail, teach Ava to cook something other than microwave pasta, write another book. Laugh. More small goals, but everything starts small. By spring, the center opened its 15th location. Ava led the ribbon cutting. She didn't hesitate. Didn't stammer. She just said, "This place is for the stories no one wanted to hear. But we do. We always will." And then she cut the ribbon like she'd done it 100 times before. I watched her and whispered, "That's my girl." One afternoon, I found a letter tucked inside one of my journals. It was Ava's handwriting. It said, "Dear Mom, thank you for never giving up on yourself. Because you didn't, I learned I didn't have to either. Love, Ava." I folded it gently and placed it between the pages of my first book. Right where it belonged. We were invited to speak at the United Nations that summer. Our topic, storytelling. As survival. Ava joined us on stage. She spoke first. Sometimes, stories save lives. Mine did. Then Daniel, then me. We stood together, hands linked, 3 people who had once been broken in different ways, now whole, now leading. Our final night. In New York, we took a walk through Central Park. The city buzzed, but inside the park, it was quieter. More honest. Ava ran ahead. Daniel reached for my hand, and I looked up at the sky. No fear. No regrets. Just breath. Just this. I used to think the moment that mattered most was the one he left me, but I was wrong. The moment that mattered most was the one I chose not to stay in. That version of myself. I didn't just walk away from a man. I walked toward a life, and I kept walking, and with every step, I became more, not because of what I lost, but because of what I built. And now, I fly. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.